Hello Hearties, it's Catherine here of Selling from the Heart, and today I want to talk to you about understanding the no. The no that you get sometimes at the end of a sales conversation, because there's something I've been seeing quite a bit lately amongst some of the clients I've been working with, and it's this tendency to beat themselves up if the client decides to say no, to question, did I do something wrong? Or, oh, I'm a failure because I couldn't get this client to enroll with me. But the thing is that, well, first of all, I want to say that stopping and reflecting and analysing what happened in your sales conversation is an incredibly good thing to do, to be in the habit of doing. Because sometimes an individual needs your help, would benefit from your help, and you not conducting the sales conversation effectively can lead to them not making that decision to go ahead, and that can be incredibly frustrating for you, both as somebody who wants to make a difference but also as someone who's running a business, and to see that client sort of drift off towards the horizon knowing that nothing's going to change for them and you could have done something differently, and that might be perhaps you got carried away and you talked about your solution and how you're going to help them too soon. It might be that maybe you didn't focus in enough on their specific problem, for example. So there are times when you can look back on a sales conversation and reflect and think, I didn't do a good enough job here at supporting this client to make the decision. However, at other times, a no is just a no. As in, you might have conducted that sales conversation perfectly, done everything you could, have guided the client through the structure really well, and they still decide to say no. And I guess there's two things I want to say to speak to that. And first of these is that as a heart-centered business owner, you're not in the business of getting a yes at all costs. This is not traditional sales. You're not in some sales job where you've got a really high target and if you don't hit it, you're going to lose your job. There's no place for selling people something that they don't genuinely need and want within our businesses. So that's the first thing that I would really want to say to you, is that if you get a no from the client, that you know that you did everything you could to support them in that conversation and to demonstrate the value of working with you, then you've done a good job. And it's quite likely that they may even come back to you later, or if they decide not to work with you, they might refer people to you, which is something that happens quite frequently. The other thing is that your potential client is a human being with their own free will. And we have to accept and we have to respect the ability of our potential clients to make their own decisions, irrespective of whether we agree with those decisions or not, because they're human beings. And because we're dealing with human beings, the perfectly conducted sales conversation doesn't automatically translate into a paying client, especially if you're not using any sort of heavy-handed, manipulative or psychological sales technique, which is not what we're all about here. So, this is what I would say, and so there are times when a client will say no to you, and you are right to be frustrated. You're right to take a closer look at the conversation you just had and identify areas of improvement and make a promise to yourself that you won't let that happen again in future. But there are other times that the no is just a completely valid no on behalf of the client. And so, for example, if I think about a recent sales conversation that I had, it was with a lady who had quite a lot going on in her life. She had two children who were both at different ages going through their exams, their A-levels and GCSEs, I think it is, and another child who was going through some very difficult personal circumstances. So 90% of her attention was on being a mum. And she was already struggling and beating herself up that she wasn't putting more time and energy into her business. So it was very evident to me in listening to her talk that right now what she needs to do is to be mum for that family. Because once the exam period is out of the way and things with the other child have settled down, she'll be able to turn her attention fully back to her business, and it will make more sense for her to make an investment in working with somebody like me at that point. So it wasn't just that I respected her decision, but I shared the decision. I also felt that this wasn't the right time. It can be that you speak to a potential client and they're about to go into hospital to have an operation, for example. Sometimes you speak to somebody and they're working with a number of different practitioners at once. And so if I have a potential client thinking about joining a program of mine and they're already in a number of other programs, that would worry me a little, because I want any client who decides to invest in any program with me to come in and give it their full attention. Because if they don't give it their full attention and their full commitment, they're not going to see the results. And there's nothing fulfilling for me about taking people's money and not seeing them get results. So there are valid reasons sometimes why somebody will decide not to work with you. So rather than beat yourself up, what I'd suggest you do next time you get to the end of a sales conversation, the first thing to do if a client decides to say no to working with you is, first of all, to acknowledge their reason, irrespective of whether you agree with it. So sometimes you will agree with their reason, like in the example I just gave you of the lady whose children were doing their exams. Other times you will not agree with it. So, clients like to say to me, do you know what, Catherine, I think I'm going to go away and try it out on my own first, and then I'll come back to you in another few months if it still isn't working. Based on a history of them not having made it work on their own. And so for me, that's not a valid reason. However, if it's a clear no, it's important that we acknowledge the reason that they've given, rather than arguing. To fall into starting to argue with or tell a potential client that they're wrong at the stage of a sales conversation, you're immediately going to alienate them, and it's going to be a lot harder for you to continue that conversation in the future. I would then, depending on their reason, I may suggest that they make a commitment now for a certain point in the future. So as an example, I shared in another video recently about an acupuncturist that I've been seeing, who recommended that I join her on a 6-week program initially to go and see her weekly. That's what was going to get me the best results. However, at the time of having that conversation with her, it was mid-July, and I have a week away towards the end of July, another week away at the beginning of August, possibly 2. And sometimes I'm working, but I'm working remotely, so I might go and visit my parents in Wales. So I'm away, and I could see that I wasn't going to be able to commit to a weekly appointment until September. So I'm going to join her from September. But what she could have said to me was, to let me know that she can get fully booked, and that if I wanted to make that commitment to myself, that I'm definitely going to do this work on myself, and in order to secure my place in her calendar, she recommends that I pay a deposit right now in order to secure that place. That would have been a really good move on her part. She didn't do that. But sometimes that's the next best thing, to acknowledge the reason and to actually schedule for them to start at a time when the time is right. If that's not appropriate or they don't agree to that, then agree to keep in touch. So if somebody's not joining you, for example, I'm going to stick with my example because their kids are going through exams. Well, by the end of August, everything will be starting to settle back down to normality again. They'll be going back, some of them will be going back to school or onto university. There'll come a point where her life and her business go back to normal. So my job is to make sure that I'm keeping in contact and reaching out at the right time to have that conversation, perhaps a few weeks before she's going to be in a position to fully re-engage with working on her business. And I guess to sort of wrap this up as well, another thing I want to point out here, which is that I think that one of the reasons why I see my clients giving themselves such a hard time when they get a no from a potential client is because on some level they think that the no might not have been the truth, that it might have just been an excuse or a smokescreen. Now, you can never know for sure what's going on in somebody else's mind. We can't mind read completely. But based on my experience, I would say that typically, if a potential client gives you details about why it's not the right time, so they're very open with you about what's going on in their life that's causing them to have a concern about whether they'll get the most out of the program, or there's a health condition or something going on in their family, or they're already enrolled in 3 other programs and they're already spread too thin, anything like that, you'll find that if it's the truth and the client genuinely wants to work with you, it's just truly not the right time, they'll normally share that level of detail. And normally, if it's a smokescreen, if it's actually, I don't want to work with you, but I just want to be polite, they will usually use one of the 3 popular smokescreens that I talk about elsewhere. I can't afford it, I need to go and think about it, or I have to go and discuss this with my partner or my other half. And so typically a sign that somebody is being genuinely open and actually genuinely, truly interested in working with you is the fact that they share this level of detail with you. And so, like I said, if a client says no, first of all, acknowledge their reason, irrespective of whether you agree with it or not. If you disagree with it, that may be the opening to another conversation where you ask their permission to actually question them a bit further and explore that more deeply. However, if you agree with it, either way you acknowledge it, you'll just go, so you'll acknowledge it and you'll either go off and explore, or you'll acknowledge it and you'll agree to keep in touch. And like I said, if it's appropriate, you'll ask them to make a commitment to the work now, even though they're not starting for a little while longer. So, a no from a client isn't automatically a failure. Sometimes a no is a no, not yet, not a no, never. And the way you handle that no in the moment will be the thing that determines whether that client comes back to you when they're ready or recommends other people to you versus avoiding you forevermore because you didn't accept and acknowledge that no from them. So I hope that was useful for you today. Do type in the comments below and let me know whether that's going to change the way you feel about getting a no from a client in future. I always love to hear from you. And if you found this useful and you know of anyone else who would find it valuable, I'd love you to share it on social media or forward it on to somebody. And I shall look forward to seeing you for the next video next week. Lots of love.